All right, this is lecture 3 for World War II. Today we're going to talk about Japanese Americans and the struggle that they had at the home front. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about the effects of Pearl Harbor. Okay, we know that the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, basically starting the war for us. It's kind of stepped us into the war, and it kind of had an impact on the people that lived in the United States. So prior to Pearl Harbor, the anti-Asian sentiments did exist. But Pearl Harbor confirmed these sentiments. It basically stated that, or showed that, some of the feelings that people had against Japanese Americans were true. Kind of like they're, sneaky or whatever. So there's only 127,000 Japanese Americans living in the United States. So there's not this huge population. So they're kind of unknown in certain areas, mostly living in the upper northwest through California. There's two terms you need to know. There's Issei and Nisei. Issei are first generation, so people that have just come here, and Nisei are the children of the Issei who are second generation. Most Japanese Americans on the west lived on the west coast in these close-knit communities. A little Tokyo sort of thing, where they would come with, to see people that were like them. Same idea of like immigration in the past, where people wanted to live with people that they understood and were like-minded. So Pearl Harbor happened. Here's a picture of Pearl Harbor. Okay, and then American opinion. So stories started to emerge about sabotage in Hawaii to help the attack on Pearl Harbor. There's some public pressure to remove the Japanese threat. Overall in the country, there is tolerance of Issei and Nisei, but there was racism emerging in the government, and it kind of led towards the steps towards interning the Japanese Americans. So here's a couple of quotes. As a Jap is a Jap, makes no difference whether he is an American citizen or not. Saying, basically saying that if a Japanese American is going to side with Japan no matter what. And then kind of the same idea from one of our generals. It says they have no confidence in Japanese American loyalty whatsoever. So again, just basically stating that no matter what, the Japanese Americans are going to side with Japan, which doesn't really make sense because they left Japan for a reason. They live in America and they are American. So they started up these internment camps. FDR issues an executive order, and we've talked about executive orders, but executive orders are issued by the president, and it's an executive action that kind of goes around Congress in a time of need. So Order 9066 was created in order to protect Americans from dissenters of Japanese descent. So he signs this executive order during World War II, ordering Japanese Americans into internment camps. Okay, they're not concentration camps. Sometimes people call them that, but they're not what we had in Germany. Basically, they're set out to Americanize these Japanese people and really make sure that they knew that they were American, and they're going to be held there for the entirety of the war. So the War Relocation Authority, it oversees the project to intern these Issei and Nisei to actually move them to these camps. Quote from someone living at the camps is the conditions were not brutal but harsh. It says we did not know where we were, no houses in sight, no trees nor anything green, only scrubby sagebrush and occasional low cactus and mostly dry baked earth. There's an internment camp in it's called Manzanar. It's on the way to Lake Tahoe. So if you ever are driving up to Lake Tahoe and you see a sign for Manzanar, that's what that is. There's not much there, just a couple towers and buildings, but there's also a Japanese American museum in LA, and they have a recreation of one of the houses or the housing buildings that they had at Manzanar. So it's pretty cool to check out. Okay, the government thought the camps was a place for Americanized Japanese Americans, as I said, teach the children about American history and all that stuff to make sure that they would become more American and side with America. All right, here's a picture of the internment camps. You can see the barbed wire to prevent them from leaving. And you can see the shacks. It gets pretty cold out in the desert. There's no insulation, single, 2x6s. So there's air gaps, so it gets pretty cold. So everyone had to sleep together to stay warm. All right. So these internment camps. It says once the Japanese were in these camps, the rest of America began to forget about them. We have a court case. It's Korematsu v. United States. It ruled that the Executive Order 9066 was constitutional. It was 1-6-3, so it wasn't really that close. It said separating the disloyal from the loyal was logistic impossibility. The internment order had to apply to all Japanese Americans within the restricted area. So if you were a Japanese American, there was no way to tell if you were loyal or not, so they had to keep protect by getting rid of all of them. So it said protecting against espionage was more important than individual rights, and that's basically what the court case says. But in 1988, Congress voted to award reparations of $20,000 to attorneys that were still alive. So if they're still alive, they got 20 grand. So you may have family or know people who have family that were actually awarded this money. All right, and that's it. Thank you.